His executive vice president, who lives in Iowa City, is here, Mark Lucas, and I'll let Mark tell you a little bit about his bio, and then he's going to share with us some of the information that Mike has presented at a couple of different speeches that he has given. So with that, Mark, please.
Thank you, Jerry. I think let's grab this microphone right here. Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Well, thank you, Jerry. I also want to thank Mark for the kind invite to Mike Davis. And thank you to the entire Jones County Republican Party for putting together this event. I'm Mark Lucas. I serve as Mike's Executive Vice President. Years ago, I served as a state central committee person for the Republican Party of Iowa in the 2nd District. I hail from Wilton, Iowa, where Jeff Kaufman and Bobby Kaufman are from, and I also served in Muscatine County. So I understand the hard work that takes place at the county level. And you could say maybe unfortunately I had to move to Washington, D.C. for 5 years, but I can tell you from being in Washington, being all across the country, I understand, and Mike Davis understands, that the grassroots is what drives this party. So thank you for everything that you guys do. So Mike does send his regards. He's in Denver. He's on notice back and forth with the hospital for a family friend. But he did commit to be here in the future. He loves coming to county events. You may have seen him on Steve Bannon's War Room. He goes on Fox News quite a bit, if people still watch Fox. And he also goes on Newsmax and One America News Network. And he's really been a champion in the judicial reform movement. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, is the Supreme Court. I'll kind of go over how our government is supposed to be constituted, some of the success that we saw with the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary during the first Trump term, and then talk about how important 2024 is for the future of the judiciary. So Mike is actually from Des Moines. He went to Dowling. He attended the University of Iowa, where I met him. Can you guys still hear me okay? Okay. He was doing law school. I was in my undergrad. And he spent some time clerking for Neil Gorsuch when Neil Gorsuch was on a circuit court. And he also worked for Senator Chuck Grassley. He was the head of nominations for all of the Senate confirmations for Chuck Grassley during Trump's first term. And so he successfully led over 278 confirmations, including the most famous and contentious Justice Brett Kavanaugh confirmation. Neil Gorsuch has called Mike the general. Brett Kavanaugh called him a warrior. He was somebody that would never back down. And people might not understand, but we were very close to Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation being pulled from the Senate. But Mike drug him across the finish line along with a lot of people in Washington. I was able to work with Mike on that. So Mike started the Article 3 project, which is leading the charge in defending constitutionalist judges, punching back against the left's attacks on the courts, and sometimes I think Mike literally wants to punch back, and opposing judicial nominees that are outside of the mainstream. So Jerry, I think you kind of set the condition for somewhat of a bleak night. I'm going to try not to be too bleak, but I'm going to start off by saying that America is heading off a cliff in 2024. 2024 will save or it will break our country, because this election has so many consequences. We heard about the southern border. We see our foreign policy in shambles. But 2024 will determine the rest of the will determine the control of the Supreme Court, the rest of the federal judiciary, and whether we remain a constitutional republic. Let me explain. So our Constitution is actually a loan agreement. We, the people, have loaned the federal government specific, enumerated, and divided powers. In exchange, the federal government promises to secure our rights and our liberties. Now, the powers that are not specifically loaned to the federal government in the Constitution belong to the states. It belongs to we, the people. The 10th Amendment confirms this. This was a radical concept at our revolutionary founding. In Britain, from which we escaped, the crown was sovereign. Power flowed from God to the king, who granted privileges to his subjects through decrees like the Magna Carta. But in the United States, we're supposed to have the opposite form of government. We, the people, are the sovereign. Power flows from God and to us as sovereign citizens, not subjects, and we loan that power back to the federal government through the U.S. Constitution. Our rights to speak, associate, worship, and defend ourselves does not come from the First and Second Amendment. That might surprise some people. These are natural rights. They come from our Creator. They come from God Himself. So the federal government, they lack the power to take away God-given rights because we, the people, did not specifically loan our federal government this power in our Constitution. The Bill of Rights, including the First and the Second Amendment, was actually considered unnecessary at the time of our founding. The federal government does not have the right to censor our speech, for example, because we never loaned it to them. The First Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights were actually added to win political ratification from those that were skeptical of the federal government. In other words, our brilliant founding fathers wanted to make sure that our federal government knew and stayed in their place. And we should thank our founding fathers every single day. Because politicians during COVID proved that they don't even pretend to care about our God-given rights to speak, to associate, to worship, and to protect ourselves. Our elected representatives in Congress are supposed to write the laws. Now, this could be a little bit of a civic lesson, but I think it's necessary to kind of rehash this. Congress writes the laws. The president is supposed to execute the laws. The Supreme Court and the lower federal courts are supposed to interpret and apply the laws. The whole point of this carefully divided and balanced system was to protect us from our own government. Whether it's the federal government's failure with the resulting anarchy, like the BLM riots, or the federal government's overreach with the resulting tyranny that we saw with the COVID-19 lockdowns, our God-given rights to keep and bear our arms as doubly guaranteed by the Second Amendment is our insurance policy. Just take a look at Australia. Unarmed Australians were marched to COVID camps. Good luck to the COVIDians if they attempt that nonsense here in Monticello or in the rest of real America. For our founders understood too well the dangers of a powerful central government because they had escaped British religious persecution and other tyranny. And for the first 150 years of our republic, the Supreme Court and the other federal judiciary understood this danger. But nearly 90 years ago, this all changed. The Supreme Court correctly kept on striking down FDR's politically popular but unconstitutional New Deal programs. Because the U.S. Constitution, they never authorized these type of programs. So President Roosevelt threatened to pack the Supreme Court. Does that sound familiar? So he threatens to pack the Supreme Court. He wanted to add 6 liberal justices to the 9 so he could get his politically desired outcomes. FDR's direct assault on judicial independence, unfortunately it worked because the court changed their interpretation of the Constitution overnight. They flipped the Constitution on its head. The court essentially held now that the federal government has unlimited power, unless the power is specifically precluded instead of permitted by the U.S. Constitution. So the Commerce Clause, the politically cowed Supreme Court now held, gives the federal government almost blanket power. Back in that time, they called it the switch in time that saved the 9. So the switch in the nick of time to save just 9 Supreme Court justices so they didn't pack the court. Disastrously, the court turned the Constitution from a shield that's supposed to protect us from the federal government into a sword that the federal government now uses to come after us. And once politicians, even those ones that wear robes, decide to grab power from us, it's almost impossible to ever get it back. The federal government became the nanny state. They're constantly involved in way too many aspects of our lives. Adding insult to injury, the Supreme Court now concentrated this new federal power with unelected, largely unaccountable executive branch bureaucrats, the Tony Faucis of their era. The court gave this unconstitutional fourth branch of government, now called the administrative state, or you could say the deep state, gave them the power to write laws through rulemaking, which is the congressional power. They took the president's power to execute laws, and the administrative state took the federal judiciary's power to interpret and apply the laws. And the Supreme Court ordered the lower federal courts to stand down and to generally defer to the administrative state's own interpretations of their own powers. This is called Chevron deference. It's a 40-year Supreme Court decision that hopefully will be overturned during this Supreme Court session before July. The federal government became the monster we all see today, where DC bureaucrats can unilaterally and unflinchingly destroy farmers, manufacturers, and other small businesses, largely unchecked by Congress or the federal courts. We all lived through this nightmare during COVID, where Tony Fauci and CDC bureaucrats got drunk on power. They destroyed our economy and even some of our kids' lives. And they did this through mindless, lawless, science-free COVID lockdowns. And this is why President Trump's transformation of the federal judiciary is so crucial. Courageous Trump-appointed federal judges have served as the tip of the spear against the federal government's overreach. For example, Judge Catherine Mizell of Florida unflinchingly took the wrath of the COVIDians when she ruled the CDC does not have the unilateral power to force us to wear those stupid, pointless, ineffective masks on planes and trains. You don't want to bring those back? Judge Mizell's judicial decision was a game changer in the legal and political battles to reclaim our rights from a federal government that just continues to overreach. More than a year after Democrat cries that Judge Mizell's order was going to cause mass deaths, which it didn't, the American people are finally waking up and learning we cannot entrust our lives, our livelihoods, and our general well-being to the federal government, especially not unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in the administrative state. Our founders understood this well. The appointment of constitutionalist federal judges is almost always a winning political issue for conservatives. Indeed, a political novice like Donald J. Trump won an upset victory against Hillary Clinton in 2016 largely because of a vacant Supreme Court seat for Justice Scalia's seat. And in 2018, in the midterm elections, 4 incumbent Senate Democrats got sent to early retirements because of their lunatic antics during the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation. So if Democrats want another Supreme Court fight in 2024, we should welcome it with open arms. Trump promised to appoint justices in the mold of the late and great Justice Scalia, and he more than delivered. He appointed justices who understood the modest but critical role is to interpret the laws as written, which is called textualism, and understood by the public at the time of its enactment, which is called originalism. Those judicial philosophies of textualism and originalism ensure that we are governed by the law and not the political whims of lifetime appointed, pay-protected federal judges. The federal judiciary is supposed to be the least dangerous, not the most powerful branch of our government. You can see today the weaponization of Biden's Department of Justice, and just how out of control and how dangerous they are. And if they can go after President Trump, if they can go after powerful attorneys with big budgets, think about us. We won't stand a chance. Trump's biggest and most consequential accomplishment of his first term was a transformation of the Supreme Court and the critically important 13 courts of appeals across America. He appointed Mike Davis's former boss, Justice Gorsuch, to replace Justice Scalia. Mike Davis then served as a top aide for Senator Chuck Grassley to help replace Justice Kennedy with a more conservative Justice Kavanaugh. And we finally transformed the Supreme Court to the first constitutionalist majority in over 90 years by replacing the late Justice Ginsburg with Justice Amy Coney Barrett. In total, Trump appointed 234 Article III judges with 3 Supreme Court appointments. He transformed the 5-4 left of center court to the 5-4 Clarence Thomas Court. He also appointed 54 federal judges to the circuits and 13 critically important federal courts of appeals across the country. So these circuit courts are the last stop of defense for over 99% of federal appeals, because the Supreme Court typically takes less than 100 oral arguments per year. We're also able to flip the 2nd, 3rd, and 11th circuits to majority Republican appointed. By the end of his first term, Republican appointed justices controlled a majority 7 of the 13 circuits. We also appointed the second most federal appellate judges and the second most Article III judges, period. The only reason why the President Trump administration wasn't number 1 was because Congress had created 152 new judgeships during President Carter's administration, so he had a chance to fill 152. And it wasn't just the quantity of judges. We appointed young, smart, constitutionalist judges with backgrounds and backbones to do their most important job, serving as the last line of our defense. And they protecting the American people from government overreach, breakdown, and mob rule, like Judge Catherine Mizell showed by striking down the CDC's mindless, lawless, science-free mask mandate. So today's transformed Supreme Court and lower federal courts are in the way of politicians' constant pursuit of grabbing power. Now, Democrats understand this, and they know significantly during this term they won't be able to overreach. So now, these Democrats are trying to delegitimize the court as a whole. As you look at institutions all around the world, and here in the United States, you've seen these leftists, these Marxists are infiltrating, and they're trying to bring down institutions. If they can't bring them down from the inside, they try to tear them down from the outside for us, the people, to lose our faith and confidence. And that's what they're doing to the Supreme Court. And the Democrats are doing this because they lost 90 years of power. And there's something that Democrats care more about anything, and that's losing power. And they're trying everything that they can to either pack the court, like FDR tried to do, or to delegitimize it and damage it beyond repair. This is why Mike and I started the Article III project 4 years ago. I was able to help Mike with the Gorsuch and Kavanaugh fights. And during those confirmations, particularly Kavanaugh, we saw how relentless and evil, I will say evil, the Democrats were. This is no longer our parents' or grandparents' Democratic Party. Too many of today's Democrats aren't liberals who love America, and they don't just disagree with conservatives of how the best way to get there. Too many of today's Democrats are leftists. They're Marxists who hate America. They don't believe in equality. They believe in equity. They don't believe in free speech. They believe in censorship. They don't believe in due process. They believe in a Me Too presumption of guilt. They've politicized and weaponized our justice systems. But we are fighting back every day at the Article III project, and we will not tolerate any vicious slander of a Supreme Court justice, the broader federal judiciary, or the rule of law. even as President Biden and congressional Democrats make those assaults on judicial independence their daily mission. If you see what's going on with the January 6th case, or the documents case, or what's going on in New York with fraud cases, or in Atlanta, it is a constant pursuit to try to drain the right of their money, and they're trying to accuse them and bloody them up. I'm not a lawyer. Mike Davis is a great lawyer, but even people who aren't pro-Trump in the movement, they admit that these cases hold no merit. We are not following the rule of law. And the Democrats know it. We're seeing day after day these cases are crumbling. But it's not about going to court and winning. They know they're going to lose. Deranged prosecutor Jack Smith, have you guys heard of him, the political hitman? So he was brought back from overseas because he'd been relinquished to The Hague because he's such a joke as an attorney. But he took out Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, right? Governor McDonnell was an up-and-comer. He was probably going to be a presidential candidate or a VP candidate. Jack Smith brought false charges against them that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was overturned 8-0. It would have been overturned 9-0, but Justice Scalia had passed away. So Joe Biden brought back this political hitman to go after the right. And Mike just wrote an article in Town Hall yesterday, which I didn't know this, but Jack Smith was actually brought on board from Lois Lerner during the IRS scandal. Do you remember that? So Jim Jordan testified in Congress saying that Jack Smith was brought in the IRS debacle to basically persecute normal people like us. So he's a hitman. He's not a lawyer. And he should be disbarred. And I know Mike and my attitude, we don't want to give up any ground. We want to pursue. We want to attack. Not because we're angry, but because we have to defend this country. So we saw it with the fight over the Dobbs decision, overturning Roe v. Wade, and returning abortion regulations to the states. Chuck Schumer, the top Senate Democrat, he told Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch that they will feel the pain. He said that at a rally. It's on tape. He was all but threatening the lives of these justices. And for over a year, the Biden White House and the Biden Justice Department have encouraged illegal obstruction of justice campaigns outside of 6 conservative Supreme Court justices' homes. Have you seen this? They're still going on to this day. This led to the Supreme Court justices having to flee their homes and go to safe houses. The Biden Justice Department even ordered the U.S. Marshals generally not to arrest anyone illegally protesting outside the justices' homes. Try that in front of Nancy Pelosi's house. Those of us in the know believe that this order from the U.S. Marshals led to the 1 a.m. assassination attempt against Justice Kavanaugh, his wife Ashley, and his two teenage daughters, because the U.S. Marshals were discouraged from tailing the would-be assassin. It gets even worse. Deranged leftists even published the address of where Justice Barrett's kids go to school. They're not our grandparents' Democrats anymore. The individual who leaked the draft Dobbs decision has still not been brought to justice. Earlier this year, Justice Alito said he knows who leaked the decision that led to the Kavanaugh assassination attempt. It is far past time to put that person in handcuffs and make an example of her, because the trust that exists within the walls of the Supreme Court has been destroyed. And destroying the court is almost certainly what that person was trying to do. These reckless attempts to intimidate justices don't fly with the Article 3 project. We've engaged every stakeholder and ensured that we're mobilized to defend the Supreme Court. The cries of illegitimacy from activists are simply leftists who won't accept Trump's victory in 2016. They just won't let it go. And it's actually the left who are the true election deniers attacking democracy. We also demand that these radical activists who threaten the lives of justices that they must face their justice. They must be thrown in jail. There are existing laws on the books that can absolutely throw these lunatics in jail. Yet Biden Attorney General Merrick Garland gives them amnesty. We believe that must change. We believe if the House of Representatives ever figures out this speaker race, that they impeach Merrick Garland. We've seen many more smears of the conservative justices just in the recent weeks, especially with attacks on Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice Thomas is a longtime target of the left. And ever since he escaped the Democrats' plantation 40 years ago, they haven't been able to tolerate a black man who can think for himself. Justice Thomas happens to be one of the greatest success stories in American history. He went from poverty to the highest court in the land. That should be applauded, but instead he's getting ruthlessly attacked along with his wife, Ginny. The importance of winning back not only the presidency, but also the Senate cannot be overstated. We've now seen over the last several years what the modern Democrat Party is capable of doing. But thanks to tireless efforts by conservative activists, people like you in this room, we have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. You know, some friends of mine at church have been despairing about what's going on in the world, right? And we're really in a battle. We're in a battle every single day. But in the midst of that battle, we're able to see the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So there is hope for this country, and the Supreme Court right now is that last stand for defense. But the conservative majority is fleeting, as it always is. It's depending on election results. The 2024 election is crucial to the survival of the Supreme Court in our republic. A re-elected President Biden and a Senate Democrat majority very well could replace Justice Thomas and Alito with left-wing judicial activists. And that would take the 5-4 Clarence Thomas court and potentially change it to the 5-4 Ketanji Brown Jackson court. Or worse. If COVID and the BLM riots have taught us anything, we know that Democrats have absolutely no problem, and they will immediately and unflinchingly take away our God-given rights to speak, to associate, to worship, and to protect ourselves. And Democrats have politicized and weaponized federal, state, and local justice systems to indict a former president. Also to indict mothers, fathers with kids, wanting to send them to prison, separating them from their families. And they want to indict President Trump, who just happens to be the leading opposing presidential candidate. This is the first time this ever happened in American history. They have indicted top aides. They've indicted key supporters. Mike and I might be indicted, might spend some time in jail together. We don't know with this gag order that nobody can figure out. They're now running an organized political campaign to attack, to smear, to delegitimize and destroy Supreme Court justices. Just imagine what they can do to us, regular everyday people. So I'll close with this. If Democrats keep the White House and the Senate in 2024, they will fully undo the historic transformation of our Supreme Court and the lower federal courts. If we lose the court, we lose our country. Elections matter. Judges matter. You hear this every election, but this time it's true. You know, my first Iowa caucus, I was a high school senior in 2000. And even when I was a young kid, I would kind of roll my eyes when every politician would say, "This is the most important election of your lives." I think to myself, maybe this is the most important election of your life because you're on the ballot, right? There's no going back. I think we've lost our country. I think we've actually already lost the republic. Are we going to be able to take it back? That's the stakes. Are we going to be able to take it back? We must save the United States Supreme Court. It's our last line of defense. We need it. We need the lower courts. We need to get a rule of law back. And I know because of people in this room that you'll bring more people to the polls with you, to the caucus, to the general election. We'll continue to support strong Republican candidates but more important than Republican, conservative, constitutionalist, people that believe in interpreting the law as written, as it was intended when it was passed, will get our country back on track. With that, I want to say thank you very much for what you do.